Here's the Vue imports file, and I haven't changed it since we used .NET New to create the project. It has two using statements, and then adds the ASP.NET Core tag helpers. This is how we can use those ASP action and other tag helpers that we've seen. Since the carvedrock.admin.models namespace is referenced here, we shouldn't actually need this qualification in the products view folder, since the product model is what we're using as the model for our views, and that lives in the models folder. Here's the create view, and we can simplify this model statement to not include the full reference. We could also leave it here, but there's no need due to that using statement on the Vue import file. We can do the same thing on delete, and the details view was what we started with, and that didn't include the namespace for the model. Then on the edit file we can remove the qualifier there as well, and the index file already looks good. The Vue start file we said was what specifies the layout we want to use, and it's specifying _layout. Here's that file, and this is a full HTML document. Doc type, HTML tag, head tag with meta tags, a title tag, and some CSS references. And then it's got the body with the header for the navbar, and further down it'll have a render body call, a footer, and the JavaScript we want to include, as well as closing tags for body and HTML. Also note that there's a CSS file that has the same file name with .css at the end. This is a CSS file that will only apply to the layout elements. Now let's prove that we can do a custom layout just by copying this layout file and pasting it into the home directory. Right under the header, I'll put a new h1 tag, and we'll make the content all caps, saying that it's a custom layout. We should see this on the home and privacy pages, but none of the product pages. And there's that call to render body and a shared footer at the bottom of the page. Now let's run this and see if the new layout works, and if our simplified product model references pose a problem. There's the home page, and it's pretty clearly showing that custom layout we created. Hopefully it's clear that you could make the HTML in the custom layout whatever you wanted. You could even refer to different CSS and JavaScript files if that was helpful. And if we navigate to the products page, we lose that custom layout text since we're back to the original and default layout. The Create Product view comes up just fine and uses the same layout, so our product model reference is also fine. And just to round things out, let's look at how that CSS isolation works. There was a style sheet reference in the layout for carvedrock.admin.styles.css, and this actually contains the CSS content tied to individual view files. Note the A navbar brand class here at the top, and it's got a generated reference there in brackets that help it only apply to the layout file. Cross-checking that to our layout CSS file, the CSS is the same, but that bracket reference is something that's created and applied when the project is built. Pretty cool. Now that we've got a sense of how this works, let's apply a theme to our site and make it more of our own. Using a design system like Bootstrap, Tailwind, Foundation, or others can help you create a more user-friendly and consistent UI. You may have a preference and can use the concepts here to apply whatever you like. I'll delete this custom layout we created in the last clip, and here's our main layout page. It has a CSS reference to the Bootstrap min CSS file, which uses the default Bootstrap 5 theme. To keep things very simple, and since the generated code we're working with uses Bootstrap and its CSS classes, we'll be applying a free Bootswatch theme to customize the look of our site. There are paid themes and you can create custom ones as well. But here's the Bootswatch website, and you can scroll through these themes, see previews of them, and download them. The Litera one here is pretty nice, so let's use that. Note that the warning button is a nice orange color. I'll click the download arrow here, and we can download just a bootstrap.min.css, which is exactly what we're after. I'll download it and do a save as, then I'll navigate to the folder for our project and put it under www.root CSS, and I'll add Litera to the front of the file name. With that saved, we can go back to VS Code and verify that it's in the directory we wanted. Yep, there it is. So now I can comment out the original Bootstrap min CSS ref and add the one for this new Litera version. I'm going to make two other changes here. I'm going to update these two Bootstrap CSS classes to navbar dark and bg warning, which should be that orange that we saw. And then I'll make the home link here an image instead of the carvedrock.admin text. The image is just coming from the Pluralsight CDN. Let's run this and see what the new site looks like. Here's the home page, and it looks pretty good. The logo showed up fine, and the navbar has been updated nicely. The informational alert on the page looks good too. Our theme is working great. The various pages use the same theme, so things are looking really nice. You can obviously spend whatever kind of time you want making this UI look amazing. And now that you know what you might need to update, hopefully you'll have an easier time of doing it. Let's talk about validation a little more, especially as it relates to views, which is going to mean client-side validation. In the last module, we added some rules that made name and description required, and the price needed to be between 1 cent and $1,000. I'll start tabbing around this form, make the price 0, then make it 500,000, then add a garbage description, remove it, and nothing is showing up telling us that any of this is a problem. When I hit create, we get all of the errors, and this is due to the server-side validation that gets invoked when we post the form. While we can't get rid of that server-side validation, it sure would be nice to let users know of problems if we can tell right away that something isn't right. Looking back at the code, there's a file in the shared views folder that we haven't talked about yet. It's the validation scripts partial file. It's pretty simple, just 2 JavaScript file references, both related to validation. If we look back at our layout page, here's the bottom of the file and it has some JavaScript references, but nothing regarding this validation scripts partial. But there is a render section async for scripts as well. They didn't want to put these validation scripts on every page, but it's really easy for us to add them where we want. The 2 places where we're editing the content of a product are Edit and Create. Here's Create, and this doesn't have any notion at the bottom of the file for the validation scripts either. But that's where we can add some code that will get those scripts from validation scripts partial onto the page and into the scripts section. I'll paste in a little block of code. It calls out a section called scripts. Remember that layout page render section call? And then in there, it uses a helper tag called partial, and we specify the name of the partial view we want in there. Then we can do the same thing in the edit file. On the index file, let's change one thing. Definitely not required, but just adding a little pop for the create new link. Let's add the btn and btn info CSS classes and call the role button. That should make it look a little nicer. Now let's run this, check out that button, and see if we get better client-side validation with this partial in place. Here's the app, and the products page, and that button looks nice. I'll click it, and we can try out our new client-side validation. Tabbing through the fields doesn't give me any warning, but when I try 0 for the price, we see our validation error. This is much better. The upper range will trigger the same validation, and if I just delete a couple of zeros, the message goes away. Nice. And if you're wondering about those required fields, if they start empty and haven't changed, they're not going to trigger a validation error. But if you add some text and then remove it, you'll see it. So we just got some much better client-side validation working just by referencing a partial that was waiting by the side for us. Validation errors are one thing, but there are other types of error situations that can happen in our apps too. Here's our running app again, and if I hit the edit link on product 2, it works just fine. But if I change the URL to reference product 21 instead of product 2, we get a browser page for 404 not found. This is hardly a good user experience, and we can do better. Even more than that, we might want to add a log entry indicating that a product wasn't found. Here's the code again, and let's go into our controller and have a look at the details view. Here it is, and if the product variable is null, we return not found. This is that 404 response that the browser understands, but we should probably have our own page for that. I'll create a new file in the shared views folder, and call it notfound.cshtml. Then I'll paste in some code and fix the indentation. Hopefully this HTML code looks nicely familiar, and the setting of the title should be equally so. None of it is anything fancy, but you could make it as interesting as you like. Now back in the controller, we can return this new view instead of a not found result. And I also want to create a log entry that says an ID wasn't found. This may or may not be something you specifically need to do, but creating log entries is definitely something that'll be important if you're developing an application. A very common way to create log entries is by injecting a generic iLogger of the type of your class, setting it to a private field, and then using its log methods. This is the products controller class, so I'll inject an iLogger of type products controller, add a private field for it, and then fix the naming of the field. Now back in that details method, I can change this block into an if conditional that returns the not found view if the product is null, and the view with the product if a product was found. And in the block for the not found view, we can add a log entry. I'll use the log information method, and then provide a message template that references an ID property. And in the params, I can provide the value that should be put in that position, the passed ID parameter. I'll copy these two lines, and then in the edit action, we've got two places that are returning a not found result that we can change to return our not found view and create a log entry. The first message I can change to simply no ID passed for edit, and the second one I'll just tweak to say that edit details weren't found for the passed ID. I'll leave the updating of the rest of the not found results as an exercise for you, but it'll be in the completed code for this module. Now let's run the app and see what happens in a not found situation. I'll go to the details on product 1, which works fine. And when I change the ID route value to 111, then we get our not found page. Great! And if I go back and try the edit page, that works too, and when I change the route ID to 17, we again see this not found page. Back in VS Code, the debug console will have our log entries. And sure enough, right at the bottom you see a log entry for both the 111 value we didn't find and the 17 one. This is great. We now have a custom not found page and are creating log entries. But what about exceptions?